With some jumbled tweets and a YouTube video about feeding a monster, Daisy Brown premiered in 2017. This web series by Jules Dapper follows the main character, Daisy Brown, as she vlogs her daily life and struggles to care for an increasingly abusive creature named Alan, created by her recently absent scientist father. The series affords its audience a glimpse into a reality where monsters are not only real, but also of varying temperaments and colors. In general, the series plays with the visibility of queerness and color, and how monsters might be a site of intersection between these elements of identity. Through the close reading of in-character tweets, the video's closed captions, and select scenes, we see that Daisy Brown makes queerness visible through the visual features of the web series format, as well as through color. Color and blackness in particular, meanwhile, is often a canvas for queerness and queer experiences rather than visible on its own. Yet in Daisy Brown's monsters, one gothic and one rooted in the 21st century, these elements of identity thematically intersect with the rejection or acceptance of otherness, conforming to normative systems or shattering these systems, respectively. Before you watch any further, I highly recommend that you see the series for yourself. I placed a chronological playlist of the episodes in the description, and there should be a link to Daisy's Twitter below as well. Additionally, this video discusses themes of homophobia, abuse, and animal death as they appear in Daisy Brown. Please do whatever is necessary to take care of yourself, even if that means leaving this video. I wish everyone the best. Part 1. Queer Visibility in Daisy Brown. Queerness is visible via subtle and selective methods in Daisy Brown. Turning on the closed captions in Another Cooking Video shows Daisy's father reading questions she wrote and placed in a box for him to read. Specifically, we see Daisy ask if she can marry a girl, and her father saying that is a stupid question before answering in the negative. These closed captions are not automatically activated when the viewer clicks on the video. If you do not turn on the captions in YouTube settings, you will not see this conversation. The queerness of this conversation is thus not completely visible. It seems like a secret to be found, half obscured and hidden. However, Nick Nocturne of the Nightmind YouTube channel, a longtime reviewer and analyst of internet horror, remarks in his first video about Daisy Brown that it follows in the footsteps of other web series, particularly the series Alan Tutorial, that are highly symbolic by design. This format relies on multiple layers of meaning, asking the viewer to dive deeper. It asks the viewer to use the visible to uncover the otherwise invisible. And these captions are visible to those who rely on the closed captions to understand YouTube videos. Viewers with auditory processing issues, with bodies and minds considered disabled by society, turn on the captions because it is necessary for their viewing experience. Therefore, while there are multiple layers of meaning at work, they are not invisible. Instead, they are most visible to people with disabilities, people who are largely marginalized by society. They are speaking first and foremost to people who also know what it is like to have to use such features, to have to traffic in multi-layered double meanings. They are speaking to people who can relate on some level to Daisy being called stupid by a parent, demeaned for wanting to explore options outside certain norms. It is thus reaching out to the most sympathetic members of the audience, to people who society deems queer not only in terms of sexuality or romance, but also the body and mind. It is a testing the waters with a kind of queer coming out to those who understand the subtleties and see her with full visibility. In addition, Daisy Brown later has its audience more broadly experience queer discovery alongside its characters. On her official in-character Twitter account, Daisy asks if Pride Month is real before thanking her followers for telling me about things I didn't know about later that day. Queerness is becoming more visible to Daisy thanks to her online friends, who provide perspectives outside of her father's narrow views. Because we can see Daisy's Twitter account, queerness within the narrative is also becoming more visible to the audience. We are experiencing queer discovery and community alongside Daisy. Daisy's Twitter account, however, is not immediately apparent to those who stumble across her YouTube channel. You have to open the description below her first video to find her mentioning that she has an account. is another semi-obscured layer to the story that further illuminates queer identity and experiences to the characters and the audience. Daisy Brown thus makes queerness visible through web features, taking ordinary aspects of online experience and making them canvases for profound queer experiences, first reaching an audience considered queer on multiple levels before broadening it to a more general audience. The text forces its audience to see and understand the features and languages used by queer viewers, heightening queer visibility and empathy for queer experiences. Part 2. Color and Blackness as a Canvas in Daisy Brown. By contrast, color is not quite as visible on its own merits in Daisy Brown. Daisy never shows her face on camera, but we see in Let's Chat About Dad, Science, Alan, and the Basement that she has very light-colored hands, with the lighting highlighting the paleness of her skin. Daisy also never speaks about her racial identity over the course of the series. This is notable because Daisy is very open about even very intimate parts of herself. One such instance is the video Late Night Itching, in which Daisy speaks about her longings as well as her uncertainties in a pitch-black room. However, Daisy still chooses to talk to her audience about these intimate subjects in a dark space. Her verbal openness suggests that she is somewhat comfortable in darkness, in blackness. Blackness soothes and reveals aspects of her character. Blackness is her gateway to her audience. Blackness is invisible in the skin, but very visible in the filmed environment. As a result, blackness is external, yet it still peels back Daisy's layers for everyone to see, allowing us to go further than skin deep into her character. It is a canvas that makes other things more visible and pushes itself further into the background. This idea of blackness manifesting not in the skin but in other external factors, making visible things before itself, is furthered by the aforementioned closed captions in the video Another Cooking Video. The closed captions are white text set against black backing. In this case, the blackness of the background draws the eye to the white text. The white text emphasizes Daisy's queerness and an early queer experience of hers, i.e. the phobic behavior of a parent. Blackness and color in Daisy Brown, therefore, is a structural canvas that renders queerness and queer experience more visible while drawing itself into the background. However, color and queerness converge in additional ways in Daisy Brown. The series monsters are prominent sites of these convergences. To understand this, we have to talk about the viral sensation himself, Alan. Part 3. Alan, Queerness, Color, and Gothic Monstrosity. Daisy explains in Let's Chat About Dad, Science, Alan, and the Basement that her scientist father created Alan with genetics and DNA. Alan is thus the result of scientific experimentation. He is the product of a laboratory, a lone man, rather than traditional parents or family. He does not fit into heteronormative ideas of reproduction and childbirth. In Doris Leibitz-Ceder's Queer Reproduction Revisited and Why Race, Class, and Citizenship Still Matters, a response to Christina Ricci, she explains, queer reproduction challenges norms of who is allowed to reproduce and how, and which kind of babies are allowed to be born. In defiance of what is natural and allowed, Alan's origins are thus queer in the reproductive sense. Alan's queer experimental origins are particularly similar to that of Victor Frankenstein's monster in Frankenstein. In the case of the creature's creation, as outlined in the introduction of Disgust and Desire, The Paradox of the Monster by Kristen Wright, Victor's careful selection of pieces and desire to create something beautiful turns to ugliness at the moment that he brings the monster to life. The monster's ugly form reminds Victor of his own sins in playing God. Frankenstein's creature is a monster to Victor because Victor defied nature to create him, a walking embodiment of his egotism and hubris. Alan, however, is not the only monstrous character made in defiance of nature. Lithop is another monster made by the science of Daisy's father, but she is kind and cheerful in stark contrast to Alan's vitriolic attitude. Additionally, Daisy, to use Alan's cruel wording in Q&A with Alan, had to kill someone to come into existence. This implies that her mother died while giving birth to her. The death of a mother in childbirth is nowadays regarded as aberrant, deviating from both the expectation of modern medicine and the cultural expectation that a mother will raise her child. It is a tragedy that ruptures a traditional family. Daisy's origins are thus also queer in that they do not follow the expected patterns or rules of heterosexual reproduction. Yet she too is kind and gentle where Alan is cruel. Monstrosity, therefore, is not the result of queer origins in Daisy Brown. Rather, it is the result of sins in playing God in a different manner. From the closed captions in Plant Update, we see Daisy's father threaten her, saying, "I'll pull your goddamn hair out." This is something that Alan himself does in the video, "Alan Pulled My Hair Out." Alan's ugly, monstrous behavior toward Daisy mirrors that of her father. He exemplifies her father's worst attributes. Daisy's father has thus made an embodiment of his greatest sin, the abuse of his daughter. Alan is monstrous not because of his reproductively queer roots, but because he embodies this paternal abuse and chooses to perpetuate it. Daisy forgives Alan after he eats her cat, Strawberry, but he only laughs and calls Strawberry a bitch. Alan has a chance to start afresh due to Daisy's forgiveness, but he doubles down on his abusive behavior. He replicates her father's abuse at every opportunity. Not only does Alan replicate this monstrous paternal abuse, but he also replicates normative and patriarchal family structures in monstrous Gothic fashion. Alan mentions that he's staying in Dad's room now, as he'd have wanted, to which Daisy disagrees. Alan claims the bedroom of Daisy's father for himself. Him referring to the man as Dad suggests that Alan sees Daisy's father as his father as well. He thinks of himself as a son, an extension of his creator. He is trying to assume the inherited position of the male head of the household. Yet in insisting that her father would not want this, Daisy implicitly refuses to recognize Alan in this capacity. She refuses to give him such a place within a normative family or home structure. Seeking a place within heteronormative structures yet being rejected by them is another commonality that Alan shares with monsters of Gothic fiction. Hafele Thomas argues in Queer Others in Victorian Gothic, Transgressing Monstrosity, that in Gothic fiction, a monster is bound within heteronormative culture while at the same time it calls the idea of the norm into question. Alan's entire existence calls the supremacy of the heteronormative home and family into question, yet he still tries to fit himself into it. Therefore, Alan in Daisy Brown is a Gothic monster whose monstrosity stems not from his queer origins, but from perpetuating cycles of abuse and attempting to assimilate into heteronormative structures to assert power over others. He does not use his queer origins to establish connection with Daisy, another queer individual. He only tries to control her. He only frightens her. Alan's coloration also signifies his attempts at fear and control within normative structures. One of Alan's most frightening moments is when he grabs Daisy's knee with a royal blue human hand in Q&A with Alan, asking about her father's whereabouts in sinister tones. He is his most hideous, his most disturbing, when he attempts to mimic non-monstrous features, all while colored blue. Yet Alan's mottled skin is a pale, bluish-gray in his earlier appearance in Let's Chat About Dad. Alan, therefore, begins life with a liminal color. He can either lean into the faint blueness in his skin or lean into his grayness, becoming more dark or black. In becoming darker or blacker, he can become a more othered color. Yet Alan ages to a fuller and stronger shade of blue. He is rejecting darker, othered shades. Blueness itself also connotes coldness and sadness. Alan himself certainly displays no grief or remorse, but Daisy has just lost her beloved cat at his hands. He is becoming colder to her, more distanced from her, as he increasingly asserts his authority within heteronormative structures and shades himself as far as possible from othered colors. Therefore, Daisy Brown uses Alan, a monster drawn from Gothic literary tradition, to show how queerness and color intersect when someone attempts to distance themselves from queerness and darker colors. Such an individual becomes a cold perpetuator of cycles of abuse and oppression in the process. Such an individual only becomes more of a monster in any attempt to reject it. The monstrous character of Lithop, however, brings color and queerness into intersection in a very different way. Part 4. Lithop and the intersection of color and queerness in modern monstrosity. As discussed previously, Lithop shares queer reproductive origins in the same manner as Alan, being the result of a science experiment rather than a natural birth. In addition, lithops are a kind of flower that, according to the scientific study by Katie J. Field and others, have, quote, simultaneous highlight and shade-specific functional adaptations, end quote. They're able to grow in both light and dark conditions. Lithop can thus survive in the light and the dark, in white and in black. She is an embodied intersection of multiple colors. Lithop's darkness, however, is especially emphasized by the series. When Lithop herself first appears in the basement, she conceals herself with a white paper plate before revealing her gnarled, dark violet face, eliciting Daisy's horrified screams. She looks monstrous in appearance, with her features made more grotesque by the shadows of the basement. Daisy's screams reinforces the shock of her reveal. She is still absurd and fantastic, despite our familiarity with Alan's bizarre nature. Lithop's disturbing reveal fits within a long tradition of depicting darkness in fantastic media. The dark fantastic, race in the imagination, from Harry Potter to the Hunger Games, explores this concept, with Ebony Elizabeth Thomas explaining, the traditional purpose of darkness in the fantastic is to disturb, to unsettle, to cause unrest. Lithop unsettles what we knew about Daisy's house, what we thought were the limits to Daisy's father's cruelty. Yet while Lithop's disruption is somewhat frightening, it is also a disruption to this imprisoning home. Daisy's Twitter reveals that she helps Daisy plan their escape from the house. She helps Daisy break out of her abusive dynamic with Alan, leaving him and the house of her father behind. It is only after taking off her paper mask, revealing and embracing herself, that this escape with Daisy becomes possible. In Queer Embodiment, Monstrosity, Medical Violence, and Intersex Experience, Hilary Malatino articulates that to embrace or reclaim monstrosity is to embrace one's status as a made thing and reject the fallacies of individualism so central to modern Eurocentric conceptions of human being. Reclaiming her maligned and dark monstrosity allows Lithop to connect herself with another person and free the both of them. They do not stay in the heteronormative, Eurocentric conception of a home. The darkly monstrous and reproductively queer Lithop thus poses a difficult disruption, but ultimately a much-needed and healing disruption of normative imprisoning systems. Lithop's disruptive choices are also ones of kindness, situating her in more modern conceptions of monstrosity, queerness, and color. When Daisy drops her camera on her horrified flight from the basement, Lithop climbs the stairs to return it. Remember, Daisy responded to Lithop's appearance with terror. To many, this would be very insulting. Lithop could choose to let Daisy leave her camera in the basement. She could decide to have nothing further to do with her. Yet Lithop chooses to help Daisy and to climb the stairs anyway. Unlike Alan, she chooses kindness even when she has been genuinely wronged. She is at her kindest when her white paper mask is gone and her darkness is exposed. Color is again made visible through a monster, with darker shades marking moments of remarkable kindness and connection. According to Toph Eklund in Uncanny, Abject, Mutant Monster, From Frankenstein to Genderpunk, this connectivity is a feature of a more modern 21st century monster, which often is not alone. Rather than seeking acceptance or being resigned to fate, the monster survives, mutates, and even thrives on the margins of social order and in community with other monsters. Lithop is thus a modern monster in her embrace of those who are also shunned or hurt by normative structures. However, not all modern monster narratives follow this pattern. Marina Lavina and Diem Tuibui explain in the introduction to Monster Culture in the 21st Century, a reader, that some narratives reproduce gendered cultural norms rather than offering a radical departure from them. There is no perfect dichotomy between the Gothic and the modern monster. Modern monster narratives are not monolithic. Lithop, therefore, is rooted in certain ideas of the 21st century monster, while avoiding other ideas within that construction. In fact, she embraces the connectivity of such monsters while also rejecting certain gendered cultural norms. One such example resides in Daisy's Twitter, which features a photograph of Daisy holding a bracelet with the colors of the lesbian pride flag, pink, white, and orange, that Lithop made for her. Lithop made a bracelet, a stereotypically feminine action in Western cultures, with colors that evoke non-normative ideas of femininity and the relationships that women can have with each other. Furthermore, Daisy accepted this colorful marker of identity from Lithop, suggesting the significant depth and intimacy of their bond. Like the bracelet being braided together, she and Lithop are braiding their own relationship. This stands in contrast to Alan and Daisy's relationship, as Daisy's father foisted Alan upon her. She had no say in getting to know him. She actively found Lithop in the basement, a place she described in Let's Chat as deemed off-limits by her father. She and Lithop thus came together not because of any expectations, but in defiance of them. They keep choosing each other against attempts to pull them apart. Therefore, their relationship is fundamentally queer. The bracelet symbolizes how they make those choices and connections, how they mark their relationship with the colors of lesbian pride. Their queer relationship is all the more visible to the audience through this bracelet, through the kind use of color brought about by a modern dark monster. It is this loving, queered, colored, and modern monstrosity that makes Daisy Brown so radically opposed to the norms of horror and fiction. Thomas explains that, more often than not, fiction featuring such monsters need the dark other as its source of hesitation, the very spectacle that causes the heart to skip in fear. It desires the dark other's violent end in a form of ritual sacrifice, purging the very source of the darkness. The monster, in all its colored and queered attributes, usually cannot be embraced. It must be a source of fear rather than love. Even worse, it cannot be allowed to live. Yet it is not the dark-colored, queered Lithop who dies at the conclusion of Daisy Brown. It is Alan who Daisy kills in her escape in Final Video, spilling his bright, almost fluorescent blue blood on the kitchen floor and staining her hands. It is the gothic, lighter-colored and blooded monster that dies for the darker modern monster and her friend to go free. It should be noted, of course, that Daisy herself is still white and the one responsible for Alan's death. Daisy and her pale, bloodied hands evokes the final girl trope in horror media. Robin R. Means-Coleman notes in Horror Noir, Blacks in American horror film from the 1890s to present, that the final girl tends to be white. When their fight with the monster is over, their lives return to stasis. Laurie Strode's quiet, suburban life can return to normal. Daisy as a character thus seems to have inherited elements of the final girl, but she is not the only survivor. She and Lithop are both survivors. She kills in defense of another monster, as well as herself. Together, they are colored, queered, othered characters who fight against and survive normative horrors. Rather than their lives returning to normal, they leave the house behind them. They reject the home, Laurie Strode's suburbia, in favor of what lies beyond. Daisy Brown thus showcases through the modernly and darkly monstrous Lithop how color and queerness can intersect in ways that reject oppressive systems, allowing instead for self-love and intimate connection beyond such confines. Part 5. Conclusion. Daisy Brown makes queerness visible through the visual features of the internet web series format as well as through color. Color and blackness in particular, meanwhile, is often structurally rendered a canvas for queerness and queer experiences rather than visible on its own. Yet in Daisy Brown's monsters, one Gothic and one rooted in the 21st century, these elements of identity thematically intersect with the rejection or acceptance of both othered queerness and color, enabling attempts to conform to oppressive systems or shattering these systems respectively. Therefore, we can now understand Daisy Brown as a work that rejects long-standing tropes surrounding queerness and color, especially that of the othered monster. While conforming to certain ideas of blackness is meant to serve as whiteness or queerness as a canvas, it ultimately seeks to render its queer and colored characters as agential and actively impacting the narrative. It is not their color, their queerness, nor even their monstrosity that defines them, but rather the decisions they make. A monster in Daisy Brown is always a person, capable of good or evil, but intrinsically neither. A monster in Daisy Brown can decide whether to uphold the cruel, oppressive structures that will never accept them, or to undo such structures. Daisy Brown as a text thus argues not along lines of essentialism, but determinism. Anyone can successfully resist the systems against them, so long as they try. Anyone, even a monster, can be a survivor, and nobody has to be the last one standing. We can stand together. Thank you for watching. This is my first YouTube video, so I greatly appreciate it if you've made it this far. If you have your own thoughts on the series, or my thesis, feel free to share them in the comment section below. I don't want to dominate any conversation about the series. My hope is that I've opened the door to further dialogue. I also hope to make more videos and to improve in the future. Constructive feedback is welcome, as are any recommendations into other media to explore. I don't intend to limit myself to internet storytelling, but I think it deserves the same level of analysis people give to a film or a novel. So, thank you again for your time, and I hope to see you again soon.